You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will make official visits to Poland and Ukraine starting today. He is the first Indian Prime Minister after Morarji Desai to travel to the European country in 45 years. This year also marks the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and Poland. US political power couple Barack and Michelle Obama will make their pitch for Kamala Harris during the Democratic National Convention's second night. Many say the former US president is still a North Star in the party. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken sought during a worldwide trip to West Asia to inject urgency into efforts to broker a Gaza ceasefire deal, but departed the region on Tuesday with an agreement between Israel and Hamas still elusive. Rescue teams and divers are searching for 6 missing people, including a British tech magnate and a Morgan Stanley boss, after a luxury super yacht sank in a storm off Sicily. Gold prices have hit a fresh high as increasing hopes of US interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve prompted investors to buy more of the precious metals. Well, our big focus, Prime Minister Modi's visit to Poland and Ukraine will be high on symbolism, even as geopolitical issues, trade and defense aspects will be discussed at the highest levels. Prime Minister Modi is scheduled to be in Warsaw today, the first by an Indian Prime Minister in 45 years, after Morarji Desai visited the country in 1979, and the shared cultural ties will be in focus. Poland can be a gateway to India to Europe, and there is a lot of potential to expand trade, experts have highlighted. But our Prime Minister's visit to Poland and Ukraine this week marks the continuation of an underappreciated effort in Delhi to raise Europe's profile in India's foreign policy over the last decade. Mr. Modi's visit will plug a missing link, Central Europe, in India's European policy at a time when Middle Europe has returned to the center stage of great power conflict. My colleague Vishnu Shom is tracking the finer details for you. Listen in to his report.
The train en route to Kiev in Ukraine. We are still in Poland. We get off in a station called Kelm. We then transfer on to a train by the Ukrainian railways, and then it's a straight 16-hour journey. It's a journey throughout the night. But this is in fact the most efficient way of actually getting into Ukraine. It's been very, very difficult in the past. I've covered the war on 2 occasions. On each occasion in the past, I've had to get onto buses and on the way back with refugees looking to get out of Ukraine and into Poland. Very, very difficult border crossings, but I believe the situation has become more regulated right now. But for India, the visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Ukraine is of huge import. It comes at a time when India has made it absolutely clear that our interests lie in being entirely independent in our foreign policy. That while we talk about the territorial sanctity of countries including Ukraine and the need for a negotiated settlement to the crisis, we do continue to maintain very close relations with Russia. But the visit of the Prime Minister to Ukraine, the first time an Indian Prime Minister is visiting this country, very, very important, because India in the process, and the Prime Minister in a sense, is establishing himself as an important global leader, certainly a leader of the G20, certainly a leader of the Global South, in sending an important message that the war must come to an end. We will of course be meeting President Zelensky as well and continue conversations across a range of issues. Not least of all the defense relationship between India and Ukraine. It's something not spoken about very much, but it's a relationship that's important. Remember, the Indian Navy's destroyers and frigates are powered by gas turbine engines provided by Ukraine. The Indian Air Force uses AN-32 transport aircraft for decades. These are manufactured by Ukraine, the company Antonov. These are just some aspects of what is an important relationship between India and Ukraine. Certainly students and their welfare. There were thousands studying in this country that's something that the Prime Minister may be talking about as well. But for now, it's a very long journey all the way to Kiev, a journey which will take us close to 20 odd hours by the time we are there tomorrow. For the moment, this is Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Meanwhile, the Israeli military recovered the bodies of 6 more hostages who were being held captive by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. This is what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed. But in an overnight operation, the Israel Defense Forces said it recovered the bodies from the Khan Yunis area in southern Gaza.
In a new development in the now 10-month-long war on Gaza, the Israeli military says it has recovered the bodies of 6 hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th. The IDF claims the bodies were recovered in an overnight operation in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. However, they did not detail how or when the 6 Israeli hostages died. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the recovery effort, expressing his distress at the loss of lives. Netanyahu also assured that the state of Israel will continue to make every effort to return all of the remaining hostages. Hamas is still believed to be holding around 110 Israeli hostages captured in the October 7th attack, a third of which Israeli authorities estimate are already dead. The rescue came as the United States, Egypt and Qatar are trying to mediate a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas that would end the war on Gaza and release the Israeli hostages still held by Hamas. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says its troops continue its operation throughout the Gaza Strip. With the death toll having reached over 40,000 in Gaza and with scores of hostages still unaccounted for, all eyes are on the international mediators to finalize a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Samia Afsar for NDTV World.
Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken sought during his trip to the Middle East to inject urgency into efforts to broker a Gaza ceasefire deal, but departed the region on Tuesday with an agreement between Israel and Hamas still elusive. Blinken and mediators from Egypt and Qatar have pinned their hopes on a US bridging proposal aimed at narrowing the gaps between the two sides in the 10-month-old war, after negotiations last week paused without a breakthrough. The deal needs to get done, and it needs to get done in the days ahead, and we will do everything possible to get it across the finish line. This is what Blinken had told reporters in Doha before heading back to Washington. But a senior Biden administration official traveling with Blinken has also added that the US expects the ceasefire talks to continue this week as well. Meanwhile, the India-Japan partnership is set against a larger context of a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific and will continue to grow. This is what our External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has emphasized as the two sides held a fresh edition of the 2+2 dialogue amid China's increasing military muscle flexing in the region. The Japanese delegation at the talks in Delhi was headed by Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa and Defense Minister Kihara Minoru. Dr. Jaishankar and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh headed the Indian team. In fact, the External Affairs Minister said the strategic partnership between India and Japan will continue to grow as we embrace mutuality and display sensitivity. We have a common strategic vision for a pre-Indo-Pacific, and there's cooperation as far as the Quad and bilateral security and defense is concerned as well. There was an emphasis on the people-to-people connect during these 2+2 dialogue discussions as well. And embracing mutuality and displaying sensitivity was highlighted. India is also expected to establish a new consulate, is what has been disclosed in this 2+2 dialogues as well. But the India-Japan partnership is set against a larger context of a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific, and it will continue to grow. These are the words of the External Affairs Minister at the 2+2 dialogues between India and Japan. The Japanese delegation at the talks in Delhi was headed by the Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa and the Defence Minister Kihara Minoru. Our side was represented by Dr. Jaishankar as well as our Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. Well, we'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. We're slipping into a very short break for now. Well, the US political power couple, the Obamas, will make their pitch for Kamala Harris during the Democratic National Convention's second night. The former US president is still a North Star in the party. Illinois' lieutenant governor has told the press, and his voice will be integral to rallying Democrats, independents, and moderate Republicans behind Kamala Harris. In fact, the former First Lady Michelle Obama's speech, meanwhile, will give the crowd a glimpse of the party's fantasy candidate, many believe. It remains to be seen if she will repeat her now famous convention speech approach of taking the high road when talking about Donald Trump. We actually spoke to Ranjiv Puri, who is at the DNC. Listen in to what he told NDTV.
There are two questions I want to ask you. One is about the caucuses, the specific messaging for each of the caucuses. And second, of course, is the state that you're representing, which itself is a swing state. What do you think could work in the Democrats' favor?
So Michigan is trending blue. I think there's a lot of excitement with Vice President Harris now being the presumptive nominee to be carrying us forward to November. We are starting to see that coalition from 2008 getting excited again. Volunteers are asking to door knock and make phone calls and talk to their friends. Things are very exciting in Michigan. If we talk about polling, the same polling that showed a very close race, or maybe even Trump leading a month ago, now has switched kind of in full form, has Kamala Harris rising above in the polling. We are very excited with the work that's happening in Michigan and the infrastructure that's been built in Michigan to make sure that our voters are coming out. I'm obviously biased, but I think Michigan is probably the most important state in the country this election. There's 15 electoral votes. There's hardly any path to winning the presidency without winning Michigan this year.
Right. And as far as your task is also cut out, talk to us about what would you and, of course, the Democrats in some of these swing states be really focused on in terms of messaging?
Well, like I said, it's really about what can you do for me, right? As you mentioned earlier, and a lot of voters want to know how their
No, but inflation is an issue that Donald Trump's campaign talks about many times. They've picked on inflation specifically. How will the Kamala campaign or Harris campaign respond to that?
So they just put out the campaign just put out a plan to tackle economic issues. The first is kind of going after artificial price gouging that's happening. We are seeing businesses inflate prices just to increase their profits. Now we have a plan to tackle that very directly. And so the key here is to obviously bring down inflation while continuing to invest in our communities to make sure that everyone here can reach their potential. As was mentioned in President Biden's speech last year, America is the greatest country in the world, and people want to live and move here to work for that American dream, for that social mobility. And so it's restoring the ability for people to reach their potential in this great country.
We also have a live update from Voice of America's Kane at the moment. He joins us live from Chicago. Thanks so much, Kane, for joining us on the World 24/7. Take our viewers through how Obama's DNC speech is likely to inject some hope into Kamala Harris's campaign.
Well, it actually comes on the 20th anniversary of President Barack Obama, then candidate Barack Obama's ascendancy onto the national political stage. 20 years ago in 2004, Barack Obama was a state senator here in Illinois. He was running for a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois, and he gave a speech at the Democratic National Convention that year that was an energetic speech that wound up becoming a defining moment in his career. It is the thing that launched him onto the national stage. It gave him prominence, and it actually gave him the springboard by which he could seek the presidency. So Barack Obama, as he comes here to Chicago tonight, he is going to speak about that 20th anniversary, that moment 20 years ago, and the bridge from him to Kamala Harris here in Chicago in 2024. So for the Democrats and the delegates that have gathered here at the United Center, you can see it behind me. They're here to listen to what some people have referred to as the rock stars, the current rock stars of the Democratic Party. Not just Barack Obama, but Barack Obama himself makes jokes that his wife, former First Lady Michelle Obama, sells out auditoriums better than him and sells more books than him. She will speak before President Obama does tonight, and there's a lot of people here eager to hear what she has to say.
But many argue that Obama is actually in a position to do for Kamala Harris what former President Bill Clinton did for him at the 2012 Democratic Convention, which was to essentially lay out the rationale for a second Obama term and explain Obama's economic program to voters who were skeptical of the pace of recovery after the recession we saw that in 2008, 2009. Is this considered a sort of turning point tonight?
Well, inflation has been very high here in the United States for a while. It is definitely the economic policy of the Biden administration, in which Vice President Kamala Harris has been a part of. And so it is a moment for Barack Obama to perhaps help Kamala Harris differentiate how she will create her own administration's policies that will combat some of these things that are concerning voters. But it's also a moment really to create party unity. There are still factions of the Democratic Party that are concerned about the war in Gaza and other issues. And so this is the moment perhaps for Barack Obama not to really talk about his past, not for him to sort of dwell on what happened during his administration. This is a moment for Barack Obama to sort of be the standard bearer of unity in the Democratic Party. And that's the message that perhaps he's going to deliver tonight to these delegates here in Chicago.
Kane, you just briefly touched upon Gaza. We're also hearing that thousands of people have actually converged in Chicago to voice their concerns about Biden administration's stance on the Israel-Gaza war. But have the protests been smaller than expected so far?
The size of the protests wasn't necessarily determined before this event happened here. There were thousands of people that protested yesterday. The protests here, they're still continuing today, but there doesn't seem to be as many people. The motions on the floor. The interesting thing about tonight, it really was the focus or the showcase of the Democratic Party. And tonight was the roll call vote. And so there were a lot of delegates, a lot of people here that came to the United Center to participate in the roll call. We heard a lot about the protests yesterday. We've heard less about it today. But there's still 2 more days left of this convention here in Chicago.
Right. Also, just a little over 4 weeks ago, Republicans were confidently eyeing victory in this upcoming election. Is it fairly safe to say that now it's Democrats' turn to take an early victory lap, or too early?
So this is the convention for Democrats. And typically, as it was for the Republicans in Milwaukee, this is the moment in which they're able to be in prime time on television here in the United States. They're able to reach voters. They're able to send their message out. And so there's always a bump in polling. There's always a sort of momentum that each party carries when they leave these conventions and head back on the campaign trail. So not only has the Democratic Party benefited from there being a change in the top of the ticket, as Joe Biden has agreed to step down and Kamala Harris is now the nominee, that momentum that she had coming into this could be buffered by even more momentum heading out of this week of this convention as she heads out onto the campaign trail. Something to keep in mind here, too. We're less than 80 days away from Election Day, November 5th here in the United States. But the interesting part about this is that early ballots and mail-in ballots, they actually begin in September, in the middle of September, in some of the states here in the United States. So the momentum that this ticket carries out of this convention could translate into votes in just as little as 3 weeks from now, as people start to cast ballots. And so it shouldn't really be understated, the sort of polling numbers that you'll see in the coming days after this convention. And if they show an increasing margin between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, that could be good news for the Democrats in November.
Right, Kane, as we wrap, I just want to ask, is it all that rosy for Kamala Harris? Because an ABC Washington Post survey actually published on the eve of the convention put Trump 9 points ahead of Kamala Harris when asked who they trust more to handle the economy and inflation. But you're on the ground. What are you picking up on?
Yes, the economy right now is definitely a primary issue for voters that are independent or voters that, each of these parties need to turn out. People are having kitchen table issues here in the United States in which they're concerned about the price of groceries. They're concerned about the cost of gasoline. petroleum. They're concerned about all of these costs that they need to pay for to live day to day. And so that is going to be a challenge for Kamala Harris to address, because she will be carrying on the Biden administration. And so these are things that will have to be addressed on the campaign trail, at least to satisfy those voters whom each of these parties is going to need to turn out to vote for them when they do actually cast those ballots. Because Republicans, they're going to vote for Donald Trump. Democrats, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. Who each of these candidates needs to reach is the independent voter or the non-aligned voters in this country that haven't necessarily chosen their candidate yet. Those are the people that these candidates are trying to sell their message to.
Well, Kane, thank you so much for joining us with that detailed update from the DNC. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates from Chicago. Thanks so much. Well, let's turn our attention to Malaysia for now. Well, the Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, he has indicated that his government may consider India's request to extradite controversial Islamic preacher Zakir Naik if evidence is provided against him. At an interactive session at the Indian Council of World Affairs, Mr. Ibrahim also said that the issue should not deter the two countries from enhancing bilateral relations. In fact, to a specific question, he said the issue was not raised by the Indian side during Tuesday's talks. Zakir Naik, as you're well aware, is wanted by the Indian authorities for alleged money laundering and inciting extremism through hate speeches. And he actually left India back in 2016. With that, let's turn our attention to the other big story. Well, gold prices, they have reached a record high. They've hit a fresh high as increasing hopes of US interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve prompted investors to buy more of the precious metal. The spot price of gold rose to a record $2,531.6 an ounce on Tuesday afternoon. That was up over 1% on the day. But analysts have ascribed much of the rally to the prospect of interest rate cuts by central banks led by the US Federal Reserve. Lower interest rates tend to diminish the lure of bonds and shares because it diminishes the likely returns. That has prompted many investors to place their bets on gold increases and gold's practical uses. They are mainly limited to jewelry and some electronics, and it does not offer anything in the way of returns except the possibility of future price rises. However, it is viewed by investors as a safe haven during turbulent economic and geopolitical times. A reaction to the wars in Ukraine and Gaza appears to have been a factor behind the increase in its value over the past 2 years, especially even as US interest rates rose from historic lows to the highest in 23 years. In other news, a suspect who police said confessed to killing 42 women and was being detained over the discovery of dismembered bodies in Kenya's capital has escaped from police custody. Collins Kalusha, who's 33 years old, was being detained at a police station after the court allowed detectives 7 more days to investigate his alleged crimes before charging him. We are now told that the serial killer has escaped police custody. In other news, Jennifer Lopez has done what seemed absolutely inevitable. She's filed for divorce from Ben Affleck, as per reports. There are major twists, including the symbolism of when she finally decided to do it. J-Lo has filed legal documents in the LA County Superior Court, but they were not filed by a lawyer. She actually filed them herself without an attorney, is what we're being told by initial reports. And finally, a rare spectacle began as an August supermoon, blue moon, rose into the sky. The first of 2024's 4 consecutive supermoons, the blue moon, also known as the sturgeon moon. It was expected to reach peak illumination on Monday and shine brightly through today as well. Here are the mesmerizing photos of the rare phenomenon from around the world. Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.